You know, sometimes a single sentence written thousands of years ago can completely change how we see ourselves. Well, today, we're diving into one of those sentences. It's from the Apostle Paul, and it introduces two figures who basically bookend the entire story of humanity.
So here it is, 1 Corinthians 15:45. Now, on the surface, it looks like a pretty simple comparison, right? But it's actually more like a riddle. Paul sets up this really cryptic contrast between a living soul and a life-giving spirit. What on earth does that mean? And more importantly, why should we care?
Well, that's the big question for us today. What is the real difference between just having life and being the source of life? To really get to the bottom of this, we've got to do a little time traveling. We need to step right into the world Paul was speaking to.
So let's go. Let's head back to the ancient, bustling city of Corinth. You have to understand, Paul wasn't just writing theology in a quiet room somewhere. He was jumping headfirst into a huge philosophical war, and this one verse, well, it was one of his most powerful weapons. Okay, so here's the core of the problem. The people in Corinth, they were soaked in Greek philosophy, and for many Greeks, the body was nothing more than a prison for the soul. So the idea of a physical, bodily resurrection, it sounded awful to them, like being put back in jail. But Paul, coming from his Jewish background, had a totally different view. For him, the body was a good, essential part of God's creation. So resurrection wasn't about escaping the body, it was about getting a renewed, perfected one. A total clash of worldviews. All right, so now that we've set the stage, we can start cracking the code. See, Paul was incredibly precise with his language, and the real secret to this whole verse is hidden in the original Greek words he chose. Let's start with the first part, living soul, or psychein zozon. Paul is actually quoting the book of Genesis here, and the critical thing to grasp is that this describes a life that is received. It's dependent. Adam's life was a gift, breathed into him by God. He held it, but he couldn't create it or give it to others. Now, for the second phrase, life-giving, or zopoiouon. And this, my friends, is a total game changer. This word is on a whole other level. It doesn't just mean being alive. It means having the power to generate life, to create it from nothing. And get this, in the scriptures, this is a power that is almost exclusively reserved for God himself. So when you put it all together, you see what Paul is doing. He's not just saying Christ is a better version of Adam. He's saying they are two completely different kinds of beings. Look at this breakdown. The first Adam is a recipient of life. The last Adam is the originator. One is natural, the other is spiritual. And their legacies couldn't be more different. One passes on mortality, the other passes on resurrection. Now that we've kind of unpacked the language, we can zoom out and see the epic picture Paul is painting. He's not just talking about two individuals who lived long ago. He's presenting them as two founding fathers, two representative heads for two different versions of humanity.
This timeline really shows the grand story arc. It starts at creation, with Adam becoming this mortal, living soul. After the fall, he passes on a legacy of death to all of us. But then, the resurrection, that's the turning point. Christ becomes the source of a totally new kind of life. And the goal is that, in the end, he transmits that glorified life to a whole new family. It's a massive, sweeping story from beginning to end.
You know, maybe the best way to picture this is with an analogy. Think of Adam as a lit candle. He has a flame, he has life, but it was given to him. It's finite. Christ, on the other hand, is the flame itself. He's the source. He can light countless other candles without ever being diminished. One holds life, the other is life.
And that's exactly why Paul calls him the last Adam. And not just the second Adam. That word last is crucial. It means he's the final word. There's no one coming after him. He's the definitive end of the old humanity and the absolute beginning of a new creation. He is the one and only source of resurrection life. So, after all that, why does this really matter for us today? What's the ultimate takeaway from this ancient verse? Well, it boils down to this. Christ came to be a life giver, not just a life fixer.
And here's the key revelation that changes everything. The life we find in Christ isn't about just trying harder to patch up our old, failing model. It's not about moral self-improvement. It's about receiving a completely new kind of life, resurrection life, from a completely new source. It's like getting a brand new operating system, not just running a patch on a system that's full of viruses.
This one verse just perfectly captures this massive shift. The old way, the Adamic way, was earthly and mortal, and it all depended on human effort to keep it going. But the new way, in Christ, it's heavenly,
It's immortal, and it depends completely on divine power.
So all of this leaves us with a pretty challenging question, doesn't it? If real, lasting transformation comes from being plugged into a brand new source of life, what does it actually mean to live from that source instead of just, well, trying harder all the time? What's the real difference between living by your own effort and living by His? Now that's a question we're thinking about.